seems like every area of the country has a season. We have some friends staying with us who have a relative who went to Florida, and they went to Florida just in time for hurricane season. They hit 2 hurricanes, boom, we're moving back to Minnesota. We have tornado season. There are fires. There are floods all across the country. And all these things do so much damage. But I want to show you one little picture here. Isn't he cute? In real life, this little thing here is 1/4 of an inch long. And if they're really big, they're 1/2 an inch long. That insect there is called a termite. And termites across our country are more damaging than natural disasters such as tornadoes, fires, and earthquakes combined. You got to feel sorry for the termite because they don't get any publicity. You know, they don't make the headlines. A tornado, a flood, understandably make headlines. Termites get nothing. I learned that a termite can actually hold its breath underwater for almost 20 hours. And that makes them uniquely qualified to survive hurricane-induced floods. They live underground in a network of tunnels, and they, as you know, feed on wood. Their little colonies typically take more than 5 years to grow strong enough to actually be capable of causing damage. So they exist for quite a while. I read one thing that said termites and similar pests cause an estimated $30 billion in damage to crops and man-made structures in the United States. Termites. They get you. You don't even know they're there. You don't even know they are there till almost the damage is done. I'll get back to the termites. I know you're excited about that. But we are just finishing chapter 4, going into chapter 5 in Nehemiah today. And where we left off is there's a big bad enemy out there. Everyone, they've cut the workers almost in half, so some of the workers can be on guard, some of the workers can actually do the work. And they've got the wall halfway built. Halfway. When Mary Jo and I walked the Camino walk-ins in Spain, there's signs all along the way. 700 kilometers left, 427 kilometers left. My very first kilometer that meant something to me, I think was like 498 or something like that, because that marked halfway. And when I got halfway, there was no joy. We're halfway there, there's still a long way to go. And it's like, you know, do you see the glass half full or half empty? You know, it's like the engineer says the glass is just too big, you need a smaller glass. But imagine that you had lived in Babylon, where the Persians had overcome the Babylonians, all your life. You were taken in custody, in a sense, as prisoners. So that was a 70-year-long thing. So we'll imagine that I'm 70. Okay, we don't have to imagine. But we'll say I was taken with my family when I was, we'll say, 25. We have 4 little kids there. And then 40 years later or so, I say, kids, I got great news. We're going home. What do you mean we're going home? This is home. This is all I've ever known all my life. We're going home. No, you don't know what home is. I can only imagine what my kids as teenagers would have thought as we're walking back to Jerusalem. And then we get back to Jerusalem and see this broken down, oh, way to go, Dad. This is a great place to live. Can't wait. They had to adjust. Chapter 5 starts out like this. Now the men and their wives raised a great outcry to who? Against their fellow Jews. Some were saying, we and our sons and daughters are numerous. In order for us to eat and stay alive, we must get grain. Others were saying, we're mortgaging our fields, our vineyards, and our homes to get grain during the famine. Still others were saying, we've had to borrow money to pay the king's tax on our fields and vineyards. Although we are of the same flesh and blood as our fellow Jews, and though our children are as good as theirs, yet we have to subject our sons and daughters to slavery. Some of our daughters have already been enslaved, but we are powerless because our fields and our vineyards belong to others. So here's the scenario. Many of the people came back from Babylon poor or with just enough. And if the crops did poorly where they were, or there was a famine such as there was, or there were taxes to pay, they didn't have enough. So there were some wealthy Jews, and some of the wealthy Jews possibly came back wealthy from doing well in business there. Others maybe lived there in exile and did very well there, but some of them had money. And when they were sold into slavery, that may not be the same visual picture that we have today when we think of slavery. Most often in the Bible times, when you're sold into slavery, it was like you went to work for this person at so much an hour, and you had to work for that person until the debt was paid off. And if my child worked for someone else, they can't work for me. So then Nehemiah goes on, verse 6, when I heard their outcry and those charges, I was very angry. I was ticked, which is maybe a normal response. And then he says, I pondered them in my mind. That's not always a normal response, but it's a very good response when you're ticked. It's a good practice. You need a cooling off period when you're angry. Most of us don't say wise things when we're angry. Most of us don't spread the joy of the Lord in our anger. Anger is something that we need to control. If I lose control of my anger, it is never your fault, even though you might be acting like I would say an idiot. But I wouldn't say that in church, obviously. But I'm responsible for my actions and handling my anger. So he pondered them. And then, after pondering, he went and accused the nobles and officials. He said, I told them, you're charging your own people interest. So I called together a large meeting to deal with them and said, as far as possible, we bought back our fellow Jews who were sold to the Gentiles. So before, back in Babylon, some of their people were working off debt. And so they in a sense, put their money together and bought their freedom. And now, all right, we're back in Jerusalem, and some of their own people are buying the slaves, are hiring others to be their slaves, which is no different than the Gentiles. And that's what they were upset about, one of the things. In other words, you're doing to your own people what was just done to us. They all knew the rule, or one of the commands in Exodus 22:25. It says, if you lend money to one of my people among you who is needy, Do not treat it like a business deal. Charge no interest. A high priority in the law, in Scripture, is caring for the poor. It's more important than personal gain. We're supposed to help those in need, not use them for our benefit. I learned there are over 2,000 verses in the Bible that in some way deal with caring for the poor. That says to me it's important. So Nehemiah goes on, in verse 9, he says, "What you're doing is not right. Shouldn't you walk in the fear of God to avoid the reproach of our Gentile enemies? I and my brothers and my men are also lending people money and grain, but let us stop charging interest. Give back to them immediately their fields, vineyards, and olive groves, and houses, and also the interest you're charging them. 1% of the money." When I read 1% of the money, I thought, oh, if I could only get 1% on somewhere. 1% of the money, grain, new wine, and olive oil. And after he confronted them, they said, "We will give it back. And we won't demand anything more from them. We'll do as you say." Then I summoned the priests and made the nobles and officials take an oath to do what they promised. I also shook the folds of my robe and said, "In this way, may God shake out their house and possessions, anyone who does not keep this promise. So may a person be shaken out and emptied." So it's like they had a robe, or if you can imagine, say, a blanket on the ground if you're at the beach. Okay, time to go home. You pick the blanket up and you shake it all out. Get everything off it. That's what they were doing to the robes. And that's what we're saying, if you don't follow through, may you be shaken out. May your family be shaken out in this way. So far, the attacks on the Jews have been from outside, trying to frighten them, distract them, discourage them. And sometimes outside attacks are easier to deal with in that they seem like that's an obvious enemy. And everyone's aware of the common enemy. And in a sense, that allows the troops to circle the wagons and we're all going to stick together. Today, we're seeing a little more subtle, but just as dangerous attack from within. Our own people. We aren't getting along. See, attacks from without and within are both dangerous. If you've ever watched a sports team, political party, churches, family, one person can have a very damaging influence. On a sports team, have you ever seen anyone that thinks they're the star? And it's very obvious they're not the star, but they always take the ball and they think it's their God-given call to shoot every time they get the ball. It affects the rest of the people on the team. In a council meeting, not ours, of course, but I've been through, as a pastor, many meetings. Sometimes there's some people that don't always have the right attitude. And you just roll your head and say, "Lord, help me." One person can have an influence that's not good. Healthy families, churches, and other organizations cannot avoid problems. But if they're healthy, they tend to take a healthy process in dealing with them, which the end result is better results. Now, you take Nehemiah. Okay, he heard the problem, he got ticked. I don't know what his thoughts were. How could those people be so selfish? How could they be so dumb? How could they? How could they? How could they? I imagine they're all going on in his head, and he said nothing. After pondering them, he confronts the problem. You always have to have a meeting, right, to fix a problem? And that's what he did. Had a meeting. He called them out, said, this is wrong, and it got straightened out. Sometimes that's the joy of leadership. You know, most of the time it's just so easy being a head pastor. Everyone likes you. Everyone thinks you're wonderful. Everyone agrees with every idea that you've got. Every idea you've got is a good idea. I mean, that's been my experience almost never. Any leader goes through that. Sometimes, if we aren't careful, I imagine, in a sense, the enemy from the outside doesn't have to do a thing, and he can go, watch this. This group is just going to fall apart from the inside. I don't have to do a thing. So the first half of the chapter is the battle, I call it the battle within. Then the second half deals with a second topic in verse 14. Moreover, from the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, when I was appointed to be their governor in the land of Judah, until this 32nd year, 12 years, neither I nor my brothers ate the food allotted to the governor. But the earlier governors, those preceding me, placed a heavy burden on the people and took 40 shekels of silver from them in addition to food and wine. Their assistants also lorded it over the people. But out of reverence for God, I did not act like that. Instead, I devoted myself to the work on this wall. All my men were assembled there for the work and did not acquire any land. So before Nehemiah came along, the governors, the in-charge people, had a pretty consistent style of leadership. Take care of ourselves first. Use the people to take care of yourselves. Now, if I went around to every fan, you know what? It's really getting hot up here. Hey. Yeah. Quit whining. No. But if I took all these fans and make sure I'm comfortable, you guys are going, he's nuts. And look at that. One of my notes went on the ground. See, it cost me. Thank you, sir. But notice that the leaders before Nehemiah took care of themselves, and even their assistants followed the leader. And then Nehemiah comes along, out of reverence for God, did not act in the same way, even though he was a leader. He said, instead, I devoted myself to the work on the wall. And all my men did so too. Nehemiah's men followed his leadership. There was a perception, I'm sure when Nehemiah came along, he's just another one. So you have perceptions of what people's skills are like. I remember when I was in Breckenridge, there was a guy in our church, Kelly, who came into our office, or came into my garage one time, and he goes, wow, you've got a lot of tools for a pastor. I hit him. No. It very clearly said to me what his perception of a pastor was and wasn't. So Nehemiah actually went to work on the wall. And so did his assistants, his men. And then also Nehemiah there was an extra bonus in that as a government employee, he got all this luxurious food. And he said, nope, I don't want any of that. Such should our government employees be, right? Just kidding, kinda. He didn't take anything like that. It's interesting, I came up with this thing about, I looked up the top 50 companies in the world, in our country, I mean. And in 19, this dates me, in 2023, the average CEO of the top 50 companies in our country, average CEO made $14.9 million a year. The average worker for those companies altogether made just under $55,000. So the head honcho, the person in charge, had a ratio of 272 to 1 of their employees. I'm not saying people in charge don't deserve, a good salary. And then I read of another company that was going through hard times. And I don't remember the name of it, but I remember the story clearly. Normally, when you go through a hard time as a company, times are slim, what do? You got to cut people. We got to cut expenses. We're going to lay people off. Who do you lay off? The last people that were hired by seniority, typically the way it's done. The owner of the company thought about this and thought there's got to be a better way. So he pulls all his company employees together and says, okay, here's what's going to happen. Here's my plan. My plan is I'm not going to lay any one of you off, but we have to cut costs. So here's what we're going to do. Everyone is going to go down to a 4-day week. I don't remember the exact numbers, but everyone was going to take an equal pay and cut and pay, including the owner. And what happened was, when everyone knew even the boss is doing this, people were knit together even more. So someone knew that so-and-so was really hurting for money, so someone who wasn't hurting for money as much gave them a day or two of their work. They would give each other vacation days. They made it through that downward cycle till the company was healthy again and came out a very healthy company. Everyone was brought closer together because the leader had some wisdom. Verse 17, the last thing here, says, furthermore, 150 Jews and officials ate at my table, as well as those who came to us from the surrounding nations. Each day, 1 ox, 6 choice sheep, and some poultry were prepared for me. And every 10 days, an abundant supply of wine of all kinds. In spite of all this, I never demanded the food allotted to the governor, because the demands were heavy on these people. Remember me with favor, my God, all I've done for these people. He was always sharing what he had. A leadership man I used to follow a lot named John Maxwell, his definition of leadership, he said, leadership is influence. Leadership is influence. Nothing more, nothing less. That's what he said. And he had a little proverb that says, he that thinketh he leadeth, but no one is following, is only taking a walk. Sometimes we all can make the mistake of thinking, I'm not a leader, but yet we all have influence. Leadership is influence. And no matter if you are a teenager in your home, no matter if you're in any position of life, you are a person that has influence. So the question is, what type of influence are you having as you lead your life on others? Those who lead best lead by what they do as well as what they say. Those who lead best lead by what they do as well as what they say. And if you are a leader, a person of influence, which you all are, if your talk is really, really good, and your walk, you don't do what you say, first your kids are going to go, yeah, I've heard it before. Yeah, no big deal. Don't worry, it's not going to happen anyway. We need to be people that do what we say. Nehemiah was a different leader, and he impacted many, many people, the whole country. We need to be the same type of different leader as well. And it starts in our homes. How are we influencing the people in our homes? How are we influencing people that we come in contact? Nehemiah was a different leader of influence by what he said and what he did. Are you?